I'm Jessica Lord. I'm an engineer. I'm based in New York. I'm really excited to be here. I've never been here before, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to give this talk. I'm not going to talk about how Electron works or how to use it. I'm going to talk about how it even came to be, I guess. And so first I want to say what Electron is. Some of you may already know. You've either decided you love it or you hate it. And so for those of you who have not decided if you love it or you hate it, Electron is an open source library built at GitHub that combines Node and Chrome into a single environment so that you can use web technology like HTML, CSS to build desktop apps that will run on Mac or Windows or Linux. Okay, so when we start this story, we go all the way back to 2015, so long ago. But actually, Electron, which at this point was called Atom Shell, was about 2 years old at this point. So Electron is like 6 years old now, and Atom was even older. Atom, GitHub's text editor, was even older. So it's 2015, and I was working at GitHub, and I had just moved on to the Atom team. And I moved on to the Atom team because I wanted to write more JavaScript. And I moved on to that team to do more JavaScript, not because I had any idea about desktop applications or what the woes were of someone who had tried to build a desktop application before. I'd never, ever considered, what's a desktop application? How are people making them? How do they usually make them? And the reality was that native desktop applications typically meant if you wanted them to work on every operating system, you might have to have 3 separate teams building 3 separate apps to work for all of your users. And that's a lot of resources, so you actually may not be supporting all of the platforms. You may be only supporting 1 or 2. And that had been the reality of building desktop applications. Oh, no. Okay. This is not great. Okay, there we are. All right, so I was on the Atom team, and I was there because I was pumped because I was going to write JavaScript more. And the more I onboarded to the team and learned about how Atom worked, I learned about Atom Shell, and that it was actually pretty special that Atom was a desktop app that worked on 3 operating systems, and that it was because of Atom Shell that I could do all of this. And I thought that was pretty special. I think Atom's great. I still use Atom. But it's a text editor, and there's other text editors. And Atom Shell was doing something that nothing else really did, and I felt like it was doing something that was potentially really empowering. And so I learned more about how the team arrived there. Earlier on in Atom's days, they had sort of done some shopping for libraries because there had been this vision for building the desktop app Atom. And there was Chromium embedded framework, but this is my Goldilocks illustration. Chromium embedded framework was too heavy. It was all of Chrome. NWJS didn't embed Node in a way that was as seamless as it could be. And the developers on the Atom team at that time were talking to people on NWJS, and they met Chang, ZC Benz on GitHub. And they really shared this vision of this other, more perfect bowl of porridge, which could be Atom Shell. And so GitHub contracted Chang, and he started building Atom Shell. And Chang eventually joined GitHub full-time. And that was kind of the state of things. Atom Shell was a dependency of Atom maintained by 1 person, meaning it had a bus factor of 1. So if anything happened to Chang, it would be really bad. And it was just kind of hidden there as a dependency of Atom. There was no plan for it, and just 1 person taking care of it. And so there were already people in this space wanting to build desktop apps with web technology. And so Slack and Microsoft were looking at this. And so if you already were in the headspace, you were already searching for a solution, you had maybe already tried NWJS2, you at least knew enough to question, like, oh, how is Atom doing this? And then you could go into the Atom org on GitHub and ruffle through all of the repositories, and then you would find Atom Shell, and you'd be like, oh, this is how Atom is doing it. But that was kind of the only way to know what was happening. And so Microsoft did that, and Microsoft built an editor called VS Code, which is like an editor just like Atom. But so they were going to launch VS Code, and we knew about that on the Atom team, and we thought it would be pretty silly for them to launch a new text editor and say that it was built on Atom shell. There was no reason for it to reference another text editor. And because you could build anything with Atom shell, it just then at that point seemed really silly for whatever people built with it to be tied in name to Atom. So VS Code was the impetus to name Atom shell Electron, which is a part of an atom. It wasn't a lot of thinking behind it, but but I honestly was pumped. I'm like, see, people are using this, like, let's do some stuff. Like, Electron's awesome. And I thought this was going to be the kicking off point. And so in our team meetings and our mini summits, I was the person when they were like, okay, what's on our roadmap? And I was like, Electron stuff. Electron stuff. Let's do stuff with Electron. Like, let's put resources into Electron. We really need to not ignore this. And I was probably annoying. But I was told Electron's not important, which is wrong. That no one will work on Electron, also wrong. And if I want to work on Electron, I should use my weekends. Rude. Very busy. So the thing is, I persisted. I researched the space, the usage, the people that were working on Electron and using Electron, what was missing, what we really needed. And so I started building roadmaps, and I just kept pushing. And eventually, I got my 40 hours to spend on Electron. Still on the Atom team, as a person on the Atom team, but who could just work on Electron. And so inside of the GitHub org, what was to my benefit was that really you only care about github.com. Everything else is kind of outside the scope a little bit. Like, there's the world of desktop apps, there's the GitHub desktop app, and there's Atom, and then down trailing Atom would be Electron. So I got to be in this kind of special position that I was a little bit out of the way, out of sight. Not too many people bothered me. So that's why I got to say first things first, documentation, which never happens. And we'll see if I can get this to work without, no, I can't. I'll just keep going this way. So I started with documentation, and I also started with a static site because static sites are great. And maybe you only need a static site, and you should Google Jamstack and learn more about how you probably just need a static site. I used Jekyll because it was GitHub, and GitHub Pages supports Jekyll out of the box. And so luckily, Chang had written a bunch of documentation already, and I went through all of that, edited it, made it consistent language, and then I made a standard for the Markdown semantics for it. And it was really important to me to have a single source of truth. The Electron docs lived in the Electron repo, and everyone gets a copy. If you fork or clone or download Electron, you get a copy of the docs. It's really great when the docs live in the source. Try and do that. And they're Markdown. They're not in some other language that requires an EPUB book thing software. They're in Markdown. They render on GitHub. People have heard of Markdown. And so I made a style guide that literally tells you like how many H1 headers there should be. 1 on a page of documentation. And it goes on to say exactly how we would describe what a method would be and what an event would be and how to represent these things in Markdown. And it was important to have this be consistent, not only for the end users, but so that we could target it with CSS later. So we have a Jekyll site, and we have a folder of Markdown docs in the repo. So I never managed to learn Ruby at GitHub, so I wrote a bunch of node scripts inside of my Jekyll file to stream out that docs folder. Oh yeah, sorry, backing up. Every Electron release is a tarball, and because the code or the documentation is inside the repo, every Electron release contains that version's docs. So I wrote the node scripts to stream out that doc folder and then basically parse out the version number and things like breadcrumb information, file name information, and all of this stuff so that I could then generate the front matter that Jekyll wants on the top of its pages so that we would end up with a site that would have really nice looking docs with information like the breadcrumbs and the version. And then another part of making the standard for how we were going to do documentation was also saying that all of the API docs are going to have a single line at the top that just tell you in one sentence what this is so that you don't land on a page with a sea of text and you can just figure out, am I even in the right place to begin with? And then part of working with Electron is that there are two processes, main and renderer. And that's important, and it's different than other libraries. And so it's also at the top of the documentation here so that you can know that you're in the right place. All right, so again, being really concerned about how we were using Markdown to document the code was also knowing that it was going to end up on this website so that we could do things like target elements like this. Some APIs in Electron work only on Mac, or they work only on Windows. And so knowing that it was going to be on the site, we can use the CSS to make it a little bit better and make these things look like tags. But it's also important when you're thinking about that to not forsake the original Markdown. Don't do something so wild that it then becomes unreadable in Markdown. I wanted it to still be readable in Markdown, but also something I could target and improve with styles on the website. So that was the first thing. And then the next thing was how to get people started on their very first Electron app. I wanted people to get started quickly. I wanted people to be able to understand. And also, I didn't want to have a lot of extra work because I was maintaining and doing all this stuff on my own. And then I had my next kind of battle because I was still on the Atom team and still getting input from people. And Atom used to be in Ruby, actually, before it was open sourced and written in Node. And so a lot of people on the team had come from that world, and they were like, there needs to be an Electron init like a Rails init. And I had typed Rails init before, and you get a lot of folders. And I didn't want that experience for people coming into Electron. I didn't want you to run a command that generated a bunch of folders that you didn't understand, and you maybe didn't need half of them. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with init scripts and scaffolding, but it was wrong for Electron. Electron apps, you could build a single app that it runs in your menu bar and tells you the weather and is this big. And you can also build Slack. So we could either build a scaffolding system that prescribed one way to write Electron apps, which there isn't, or we could build a scaffolding system that supported every single flavor and recipe of Electron app possible, which is a lot of work. So I felt like we weren't going to do that. These are flags in an imaginary command line script that just say no. So luckily, I got my way, and I got to do this version instead, which is the Electron Quick Start, which is a bare bones Electron app that you clone, and then you npm install and npm run, and it launches a very bare bones Electron app. And so for me, I wanted it to be really simple. I wanted it to be a jumping off point and not do too much, but also let people know where they were. So in this, the DevTools opens up. So as a web developer, you can already orient yourself. It looks like Chrome. It looks like things you're familiar with. And then there's only a couple of Electron API calls just to demonstrate what that is. But other than that, it is super simple. And when you open it in your text editor, you see an index.html file, and you know what to do with that. And you can start editing it and see the changes right away. So developers. I prioritized the developers who did not realize what Electron was and what they could build with Electron. I did not care so much about the ones that were already building VS Code and Slack because they got it. They were already in that headspace. They were already looking for something like Electron. And I wanted the people who didn't yet know that they could do things with Electron to know. And so the next thing I worked on was an Electron app that demos the Electron API. So especially in the early days, it was still kind of confusing at what Electron was to begin with. It was Chrome, and it was Node, and it's desktop apps, and what do people mean with native operating system? And I felt like one of the big hurdles was still explaining to people why you would use Electron, what you would do with it. And so the API demo app is an Electron app that opens up, you download it, you already get the sense of like, oh, an Electron app is something my users would install like a normal app with icons, and it's a very familiar flow. And then you open it up, and you have kind of a left sidebar of common Electron things like opening a new window, printing a PDF, and some of these common native things that you would use in Electron. And you get to demo them and actually interact with it and see, like, oh, this is what they mean when they say system dialog, and start to get ideas and see what you can do with Electron. And a cool thing about this app is that it's an Electron app, and the sample code is the actual code. So we can use the Node API to FS read a file, and then use the Web API to say the text content of this element is what we just read from this file. And so in terms of maintaining the app, when you update the app, the sample code is also updated. It's not two things you have to take care of. So reoccurring theme is not giving yourself more work. Another thing is that this was a few years ago, and ES6 was still really new. And I'm targeting web developers who aren't using ES6 everywhere. And I didn't want to write, just because I could, I didn't want to write a bunch of JavaScript that looks different to people. And, but at the same time, wanted to highlight that a feature of Electron is that you get ES6 out of the box. And so the API Demos app explains that there are 3 bits of ES6 that we're using, and here's what they are. It was const, inlet, and string templates. That way, people are made aware, educating them, and also just not writing a bunch of different looking code because we can, or it's the new cool thing. Because it's not about you. Also, this app was built to open up. I wanted people to be able to split it open, look at the insides, and see how an Electron app works. And so all of the files and folders are thought about so that they all relate, so that you can open it up and you can find the HTML view and the corresponding main and renderer process files that go along with it. And then there's documentation about that folder structure and diagramming of how this app actually runs from start to beginning, which is something I would love to see more often. I want to know, like, what happens when you run this? What happens first? Okay, so I said that I was prioritizing new developers that didn't already know what Electron was, but it doesn't mean I didn't care at all about the people who were already contributing. Electron really needed those people and needed the Electron community and to create a space for this Userland ecosystem to evolve, because Electron had been built for Atom. It had the features that Atom needed. It didn't have the features that a Slack or a chat app needed. And so it took those teams to contribute those features back to Electron, and that was really essential for making Electron better and making it have tons of features and APIs that Atom would never come to on its own because they were never things that Atom was going to do. And so there is a place on the site where it's huge now. You can contribute your Electron app, and the goal was to help people find each other, so people writing Electron apps could find other people writing Electron apps, and hopefully some of them were open source and people could learn from each other. And then there's Userland, which has all the stuff that the users have built, which makes sense for people to do, like building a React-specific, wow, 5 minutes, okay. A React-specific tool for starting Electron apps with React. So then eventually, one more Atom person came over to Electron. We got headcount to hire one more person. There were 4 of us. We got Electron to its 1.0. We moved it all out of the Atom org. It got its own org. We had our own meetings. And it was really real. And then, like Mary Poppins, I went on my way for greener pastures. I wanted to work with more women, if I'm real. So the Electron team is great now. It's a lot different, but anyways, that was my own thing. So final thoughts and why I thought any of this was maybe worth talking about is that community engineering is something when I look back at what I was working on then and kind of what it would be called now, or what I was doing at all, I think of it as community engineering. And actually, now I've seen IPFS do a job posting for a community engineer. Jen Schiffer at Glitch is a community engineer. And, and community engineering is a thing, and I think it's great. And my background in urban design and architecture, I think, is not so different to why I found all of this work really satisfying, because it's about helping, or it's about how people understand and experience a system and building tools that put new developers first. Electron's situation was also really different, and I think that worked to its advantage. It wasn't like Atom. Atom was GitHub's vision and an internal vision that had been shaped and cared about for a really, really long time. And so Electron didn't have that. Electron wasn't planned. It was off kind of to the side, and all of that worked out really great for Electron. And Electron got to be in this really unique position where it was an open source project that really responded to the community. The community is who it cared about, because there wasn't this internal GitHub vision like there was for Atom. One day, though, Electron will be gone, and it should be, because it should be the stepping stone to the next thing. And if you hate Electron and CPU usage, you should hate more if nothing ever replaces it, because that's the problem. But it should be replaced, and something better should come along. And I also hope that our current ideas about documentation and talking about code will be gone too. Another thing I did outside of my official Electron capacity was challenge myself to try to explain Electron in the simplest terms as I could. And so I created this site, Essential Electron, with the limitations of each section has to be 2 to 3 sentences. It can't use jargon. If there's industry terms I can't avoid, they're defined below. And there's links on the bottom of each section for more information. And I just want us to, I love that people are doing more illustrations and diagrams, and I just hope that keeps growing and we change the way we talk about code and who we assume is reading our documentation. And so in general, I hope that you see ways to scale down and actually give yourself less work so that you can focus on people. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you.